This video discusses some of the important environmental factors that influence the distribution of marine organisms. Knowing something about the range of environmental conditions that can be tolerated by different species or different animal groups can allow us to use those groups as environmental indicators. And fossils have been widely used for many years by oil companies, for example, to help determine the ancient environmental conditions that were present during deposition of sedimentary rocks. So if you've ever traveled around California or even comparing Santa Cruz to your own hometown, you may have noticed that there are different types of organisms living in different places. And it's really the local environmental conditions, along with interactions with other species, that are some of the important controls on the distribution of different species. So for land plants, maybe it's a group familiar to you in your daily life, things like the amount of rainfall can be very important. But in this video, we're going to consider the environmental parameters that might be relevant to marine animals. And as you might guess, rainfall is not typically one of those parameters. So no single marine species has a truly global distribution. It's rare to find the same species living at the equator and in the Arctic, for example. There's a variety of reasons for this, but at this large geographic scale, temperature is a very important control on their geographic distribution, particularly on their latitudinal or north-south distribution. So for example, reef-building corals today live only in the tropics, in the warm water of the tropics. There are other species of corals that can live in higher latitudes or in colder water, but temperature is one of the important controls on where particular species live around the world. At a more local scale, the depth of the water, which is also called bathymetry, routinely shows up as an important control on organism distribution, especially for those organisms that live on the seafloor. So the technical term for that is benthic. So benthic organisms live on the seafloor. So it's very important to note that the organisms don't actually care about the water depth. They don't know how much water is above them. They live on the bottom. However, and even though pressure does increase with depth, it's actually pretty unimportant for marine organisms. However, there are lots of other factors that do vary predictably with water depth. The amount of wave or current energy is highest in shallow water, for example, and decreases with depth. The consistency of the substrate or the seafloor that they live on, whether it's firm or soft or rocky or sandy or muddy, also changes with depth. And the amount and type of food, especially the particulate organic plankton that many marine organisms eat, also changes with depth. So it's these factors, water energy, the nature of the substrate, and the type of food available that lead to these predictably depth-related distributions. So other aspects of water chemistry, especially salinity and oxygen concentration, for example, can also be important. In the open ocean, salinity is fairly constant at around 35 parts per thousand, plus or minus a couple, but salinity can be lower, or brackish, in coastal environments like an estuary, or it can be higher, or what's also called hypersaline, in other environments like lagoons, for example, in desert regions. So these factors may be very important for some organisms, but other organisms may be able to tolerate a broader range of conditions. So these are the terms in the bottom right, this euryhaline and stenohaline. That's what it's referring to, and we're going to talk about those terms in more detail in the next couple slides. So some organisms can tolerate a broad range of temperatures or a broad range of salinities. This typically means that they can live in environments that differ from normal marine conditions in terms of salinity, oxygen, etc. We often, at least loosely, call those conditions stressful if they're not exactly what the normal marine ocean is like. So the general term given to organisms that have these broad environmental tolerances is this word eurytopic. So an organism can be eurythermal if it can tolerate a broad temperature range. It can be euryhaline if it can tolerate and live in a variety of salinity levels. But note that just because an organism might be eurythermal doesn't necessarily mean that it will also be euryhaline, and so forth. The opposite, an organism that can only tolerate a narrow range of salinity levels, or oxygen concentrations, or whatever condition, is given the term stenotopic. So eurytopic means that they can tolerate a broad range of whatever condition, and stenotopic means that they are restricted to a fairly narrow range of conditions. And in general practice, the term stenotopic refers nearly always to organisms that can only tolerate normal marine conditions, or conditions that are similar to the open ocean. So really, it's not just the breadth of the range. For example, stenohaline organisms have both a narrow range of salinity tolerance and live in normal marine conditions around 35 parts per thousand, plus or minus a bit. So these concepts of eurytopic and stenotopic organisms, even though it's only possible, of course, to determine general preferences for extinct species, but nevertheless, these eury and stenotopic terms can be quite useful when using the distribution of fossils as evidence for ancient environmental conditions.